Greetings from BIC Alliance and welcome to today's webinar, Bridging the Skilled Trades Gap, an Innovative Approach, presented by our sponsor, GP Strategies. This is Mark Herzog from BIC Alliance, and we're so glad to have you in our virtual room today. And I'd like to start off by introducing our presenter, Eric Rogers. Eric is the Senior Vice President within GP Strategies Professional and Technical Services Group. He's been with GP Strategies for over 25 years and oversees the strategic approaches, successful launch of performance improvement projects and services focused on multiple market sectors, including oil and gas, high tech, pharmaceutical, metals, pulp and paper, and food and beverage. Eric was published earlier this summer in BIC Magazine with the article, Crisis, the Talent Gap in Our Labor Force. Eric is a United States Navy veteran and served as a lead engineering laboratory technician and mechanical lead in the nuclear-powered submarine force. Eric currently works from GP's Pottstown, PA office, and I'd like to now hand over the microphone to Eric. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be presenting on behalf of GP Strategies and BIC today. And we've got a very, very interesting setup that we want to discuss. It's a scenario that many of the folks that have joined us on this conference and webcast today are facing. And obviously being in the training and education field for so long, I actually like to start off with a polling question. So I'd like to ask all the individuals that are in attendance today, if you're following on screen, we've got a polling question up that asks, are you currently experiencing challenges in your skilled labor workforce? So I ask each of you, if you have the opportunity to interact, respond to that, and what we'll do is we'll let that build for a little bit. Just simply clicking the circle on the choice that matches yours and then hit submit. And I'm going to go ahead and push us onto the polling results, which very clearly these indicated match exactly the kind of statistics that we're seeing across industry today. I know that we're in excess of 70 different participants, and that number continues to grow on this webcast. So just to put that in perspective, 90% of you have responded that you are in fact currently experiencing challenges with your skilled labor workforce. And with that, it kind of leads in very, very nicely to some of the information that we have. And always in any situation like this, you want to start with what do we have that validates that this problem is truly a problem? What are the challenges that we're facing? The Society of Manufacturing Engineers, and they just recently changed their name to just SME, SME has stated that the skilled trades vacancies can soar fivefold to almost 3 million vacancies by 2015, and that's just inside of the U.S. And it's a combination of both an industry rebound, assuming that our government decides to start back up again, and the baby boomer retirements. A second key point is a lot of our manufacturing or production skills gap has over 3 million jobs available, but even with that unemployment rate as high as it is, we still have 43 straight months until this decline. And an additional item, manufacturing skills gap in a survey of over 1,100 U.S. manufacturers, and this is exactly matching what you just showed me in your own polling. 83% of the companies reported moderate to serious shortage. And, excuse me, I said that was the Society of Manufacturing. At the end there, that last survey was performed by the Manufacturing Institute report. So there's some pretty compelling data out there above and beyond just our own anecdotal evidence. And when we start looking at the production and the manufacturing concerns, we also have to take into account Manpower Group in 2012 completed a survey. They do this each year. That survey revealed that skilled trades was the #1 hardest job to fill in the United States. So let me take a chance just real quickly here to also remind everyone when I'm using the term skilled trades, it's not just the skills of perhaps say a maintenance technician, but a lot, especially in the oil and gas, petroleum and chemical industries, you're dealing with operators and other technicians that have a very broad and complex range of tasks and knowledge that they have to keep up with. So they certainly fall into that same type of skilled trades category. And if you actually go into the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, you will find that they also use that same type of formulation when they're calculating what is skilled trades and how is it being impacted. So let me move on to the next bullet, because all of the industries that we're dealing with here today are experiencing this. And it really is the reason why we use the term crisis. This is not isolated to one particular industry. It is not isolated to one particular country even. This is almost a situation that spans everything from soft manufacturing to obviously our oil and gas, and especially with some of the newer areas, the pipeline and then the natural gas, those new venues that are starting up. We're having a tremendous strain on a very small talent pool that's available to us, and it is reaching across all of these various areas. And the industrial firms in the Gulf Coast. A lot of the attendees today, certainly not all of you, but a vast majority are from the Gulf Coast region. And if I use IIR's most recent submittal, over $44 billion of capital and maintenance projects are estimated to be active right now in the region. And as you can see on the slide, that equates to over 1,100 active projects. That's an awful lot of demand when you've got a depleted pool of talent. So I've done my job or at the beginning or the opening, and that's kind of that shocking introduction where you want to try to get some statistics out there, validate that we're all on the same page, and ensure that we're all agreeing that that's the kind of situation that we're up against. So what got us here? What got us here is a combination of many different factors. If I try to distill it down a little bit, there's probably 5 core reasons that have led multiple industries and our economy to be in this situation, starting with, first, it's a service-based economy that we live in today versus a manufacturing-based economy. If you've actually done some of the research and you go back and look at the split, realistically, back in the very early 1900s, both service and manufacturing as a labor pool were very close. But shortly after World War II, even though there was a dramatic uptick during the Second World War, manufacturing and service economy split in the U.S. And actually the service-based economy, even if you take all the different recessions that we've survived through, there's been a dramatic shift to a service base. So everything from financial, hospitality, retail, health and human services, information technology, and even our field, which is education, is a service-based economy. But your field, everything around production or manufacturing-based, continues to be flatline, especially in the past 20 years. As more and more manufacturing and production has been offshored, that leaves our country with a very depleted source of talent that's going to migrate. The second is our socio-economical shifts. And inside of highly developed countries, this occurs not just in the U.S., but also obviously in Canada, in the U.K., in Japan, Germany, France, any of those that over time have what I like to call a white-collar effect. So as moms and dads grow families, they want their children to have hopefully a better future. So many of the individuals have pushed away from a manufacturing-based to more of a white-collar job, a legal position, or perhaps something in the field of health sciences, something that doesn't require all of the physical labor or some of the dangers associated, and that has shifted a lot. The third item talks about the loss of the talent pool just in general from the standpoint of our armed forces. The talent pool in general, a lot of our manufacturing and production came from the armed forces through the years. A lot of the big advantage of the armed forces was they had years of training, they had tons of hands-on experience, they actually operated a lot of very complex systems and processes, and they were also used to, of all things, shift work, being away from their family for long periods of time. They were experienced at taking directions and following through. They usually had terrific emergency response type of training. So they were a natural addition to our labor pool. But unfortunately today, with the shrinking of the military and the specialization of that workforce, that talent pool again is somewhat depleted. The next point talks to our educational infrastructure, and I use the term evaporated here. And really what it comes down to, and again, kind of showing my age a little bit, some of you on the call probably remember things like industrial arts classes or vo-tech schools. And these have become a shadow of what they used to be inside of the U.S.-based market area. I mean, so many schools, it was a natural place for a lot of individuals. It was called shop class. And although it was not necessarily enough to get a young high school student prepared for the complexities of an oil and gas field or a refinery, it certainly gave them some of the rudimentary hands-on fundamentals that would tell them that they had natural aptitudes and would drive them there. Well, with our socioeconomic shifts, our education system has followed suit, and it has basically abandoned a lot of this. So what you see today and what you'll read out there is many of the major companies that do have influence on their local communities, they are definitely out and about trying to interface both at the high school and the community college level to, if you would, start a renaissance of these types of programs, because they need that talent pool to be pushed in their general direction. But right now, so much of that educational infrastructure has evaporated. It's just non-existent for a lot of us. And my last contributing factor here deals with the rise of technology. And we have all experienced this in one degree or another. Some of us don't pick up the phone anymore because we can just put it on voicemail, and that way we can screen all of our calls. We become less apt to pick up the phone, and we also lose some of our conversational capabilities over the phone by doing that. The same is true in a weird way from the rise of technology. As more and more of these technological advances have taken place into our workforce, an operator or a production person has less and less responsibilities that they are required to oversee and to work through. And probably the best example I can give is we're seeing a tremendous shortage in troubleshooting skills, because years gone by, the advantage of technology is it automatically indicates different parameters. It may oversee things. It may even self-correct. But part of the problem associated with that, and problem may not be the right word, but definitely one of the challenges associated, is that technology now is robbing our operators of the very important tacit knowledge of actually going through a troubleshooting experience themselves and being able to produce the right outcome, troubleshoot a system, and correct it. So all five of these factors, and I'm sure if we had the time we could go further, but these are our main contributing factors that lead us to where we're at today. So how do we find a solution? I've spent the first 15 minutes of our webcast today leading you up with this documentation, but this is what you're all here for. I got to believe that most of you are on this webcast hoping to pick how's the approach, what's the methodology, or what are some of the solutions that are out there. So let's start first with an additional interactive polling question. And I promise this is our last polling question, but what I'm intrigued to know is, how do you rate your current skilled labor gap solutions? Now, I'm talking about the solutions that you have in place today inside of your organization. And it starts with, we got this. You don't have any issues at all. You feel very confident in your company's approach. As a matter of fact, you should probably be considering the next webcast because of the solutions you've got in place. Our second choice is, we have most of the right solutions, but not all of them. And then we go to fair to middling. Some solutions are in place, but I would only score us as average. At the latter stages, we have, I'm not that confident about our current solutions, and obviously at the end, we have Houston, we have a problem. So what I'm looking for right now, and because of the size of the attendees that we have here, we're having a little bit of a lag. So I'm just going to hold up a little bit before we fire off our next answer, giving all of you a chance to respond to that. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, terrific. Looks like we're getting most of our results are coming through. And this, again, gang, you are definitely responding exactly in line with what we've experienced up to this date. We've got a lot of organizations that fall somewhere in the fair to Midland with some of the solutions that are in place. Obviously, you guys are in business for quite a while, so you've got to have some solutions, but then there's quite a few of us that are also not confident about our current solutions. So if I do some very, very quick math, basically call that 40% and 38. So 78%, or just under that, 77 to 78% of our attendees today fall into the category of the fair to Midland or not that confident. So I very much appreciate your interactivity on this. It's great data. Let's move on to what's the best approach here. So it starts with, for many of you that may have been in a learning situation before, this is certainly not something that you would call new. For those of you that have not spent a lot of time in talent development, we affectionately call this the ADDIE model. It is the instructional systems design approach to how do you actually make sure that you are building absolutely the best learning and the learning transfer process for an individual. It starts, and the reason we let me start with, it's affectionately called the ADDIE model because of the 5 steps that make up this systematic approach. Starts with analysis, to design, on to development, implementation, and evaluation. There are many different modes and variations associated with this, but overall, most people would call this the standard instructional systems design approach. What's critical here, though, is a lot of folks tend to skip the first step. A lot of you are probably somewhat similar to me. I'm a little bit impetuous. I like to get to the solution as quickly as I possibly can, so I have a tendency to dive in before I've taken the time to really analyze what's our core or root issues. But I'm here to tell you, after 25 years in the learning industry, it's absolutely critical. You've got to take the time to do that analysis. That analysis can consist of many things, both the training needs, the job requirements and the job needs, what the employees look like, what's that target audience look like, what are their skills to begin with. So often, I can't tell you how many different approaches and projects we've been on where, quite frankly, we walked into a situation where we couldn't believe that the current company didn't take the time to even look at their own workforce and evaluate what that workforce's experiences are being. Perfect situation. A lot of companies will jump and immediately gravitate to e-learning. And yet they'll find out after they've kicked off an e-learning adventure that only 40% of their workforce is really fluent with computers. And another 20% is decent at it, but not really that comfortable in an e-learning environment. So now you're down to only 40% of your population is truly adept at that e-learning. And even though you may have terrific training that you've built, the modality that you chose or selected to transition or transfer that information was not the best fit. So forgive me if I get bogged down here because I want to keep moving on, but the analysis is a very important stage. You've got to look at things like what tasks require the training, what kind of performance standards you're going to be looking for, and absolutely what kind of skills and knowledge and abilities are going to be necessary to complete that task successfully. Then you move into design. Designing a training solution also includes training does not solve all the problems. A lot of the different situations that we may be facing, training may not actually be even part of that picture. So you want to make sure that you're designing something that actually is right. And I go back to what I had just talked about with the e-learning now and say, what is the training setting? What are the types of plans that we're setting up? You've got to list what are your enabling objectives. What is it that you need? It may be job aids. You may have to consider localization. Many of you are multinational or international type companies, and you may have documentation or procedures that you're trying to establish one best-in-class set. That means you're going to have to translate them. That's part of the design up front, and if you have a training program that's going to go with it, you're going to have to factor that in as well. When it gets down to the development, that's fairly straightforward, and except that there's certain things that you want to spend time on, which is definitely making sure that the methods of the training are in a repeatable fashion. I'll get on my high horse and talk to you about structured OJT and ensuring that the on-the-job training activities, exercises, and labs are highly structured so that they're highly repeatable regardless of who is delivering them. And that gets into our implementation, where we also want to make sure, especially from our record keeping, our in-training evaluations, and to ensure that we're actually getting job performance data that indicates the work that we've invested into these employees and trying to get learning going has actually imparted knowledge, but also we are getting what we're looking for. So let's talk about a skilled trades best practice. And what I'm looking for here, we do have the smaller screen, so this is a little bit of an eye chart for you, but we will be more than happy to make sure that if anybody would like a copy of this, we can get it in a larger format for you. But look at this skilled trades best practice with 4 tiers that are included here. And this also introduces things like our blended learning approach. There is no two ways about it. When you're talking skilled trades, first we got to start with the core competencies, and I certainly don't mean to be insulting, but it's appalling how bad our math reading and like print reading skill sets really are for our incoming workforce. Our entry-level employees, and that does not just mean the younger workforces, but just across the board, when it comes to these types of occupations, strong math and reading skills are an absolute requirement. And yet we find that many of the individuals struggle with it, or they've long since forgotten, and so therefore they haven't applied a lot of those old math skills, and that's critical. Now, here's a perfect example of where a blended learning approach comes into play. Because as you look at this graphic, on the one side, I'll call it the right side as you look at the screen, that's your math reading and print reading. But on the left side, you can see we can use things like the internet, we can use self-study, we can do videotapes, we can do CDs. All of this fundamental and core competency stuff really is predominantly cognitive. And what do I mean by that is it's all knowledge that can be exchanged as a theory. We don't need to apply too much of it until we get to the upper ends of our fundamentals tier. So this is a great opportunity for us to provide self-study modalities, giving our people a chance to do it either online or in a self-study, the CD-ROM type of a learning lab if you have that kind of facility. There's just a lot of different venues that you can utilize to your advantage. And what's critical here is you really need to do this also, because what I typically see is when you get to a classroom, if you haven't brought everybody to at least some standard level of performance, that classroom experience is really, really challenged, because you'll have, out of a class of 15 individuals, 5 will be stellar, just outstanding individuals, really sharp, and they're just looking for those 1 or 2 things. But the other 10 that are in there are going to be somewhere in a very broad band of, holy cow, I can't even remember any of this stuff, to I think I get this, but I'm definitely going to need a little bit more time brushing off the rust. And then what you find as an instructor or someone that's trying to set up this program, so much of that class time is spent trying to keep everybody at a single pace moving forward. Now you've lost your upper 5 because it's not moving fast enough. And then out of the other 10 that you did have, you may spend so much time on fundamental skills that you really don't get to the meat or the core of what that training session was really about. So we strongly recommend that you try to integrate blended learning, which leads us to Tier 3, gets you to the advanced fundamentals. At the advanced fundamental levels, we definitely want to get into some systems ops, some troubleshooting, servo valves, classrooms and labs. This is where you're going to hear me talk a lot more about kinesthetic or tactile learning. If you got a skilled workforce, you got to have kinesthetic and tactile learning built into your approach. You don't ask someone to sit in a classroom to figure out how do you do the brakes on your car. And then at the end of the classroom, tell them, okay, we all did that on an overhead, you know how to do it. You've got to get them in a hands-on scenario where they actually apply the learning during the process. We are strong proponents of that style of learning. Again, as you move up these tiers, that's where you have to focus on the kinesthetic and tactile learning. And not to get into a buzzwordy situation, but you also start dealing with what's called tacit knowledge. And it's a very important part of the adult learner. Tacit knowledge, simply put, it's a knowledge that you can't even express in a written form. Let me give you the example. When someone tells you to throw a fastball or to throw a football harder or put a bigger arc on it, it's a lot harder to actually describe what that is than it is to just know intuitively, okay, if I want a little bit more arc, I'm going to bend here and push through in order to arc the ball, the flight of the ball. The same could be true pedaling a bicycle, coming around a corner. How much lean do I put into that corner so that I have far enough to get a good corner, but not too far so that I wipe out? That's called tacit knowledge. You have got to build tacit knowledge into your skilled trades best practice and the delivery of that. Then that last tier is equipment specific. And clearly what we're focused on here is a graduation of, if you would. You don't become a master craftsperson in a day. This can take years to obtain this level of knowledge and skill and experience. But when you get to the top, you definitely need to make sure that it is custom or tailored to your environment and your equipment. One of the things that upsets me the most, especially in a high hands-on maintenance or operations, is to do what I call tinker toy or Lincoln log training, where I've seen some classes where, be it an electrician, is asked to deal with a little mini motor instead of a live industrial full-sized motor. If you're going to be dealing with shaft alignment, you've got to have actual components that are lifelike and industrial size. Make those individuals go through that actual equipment specific. And now we're getting into the laser alignment so that they can get that tacit knowledge, get that feel. And actually, that's what's going to increase the application and the transference to your company's output. All right, so how long does this stuff take? I know I've still got a little bit of a lag here, so I'm going to just give you a quick snapshot. In no case does any of these estimates, they're not finite, is what I'm trying to get to. So for each organization, dependent upon its scenario, these things can shift. But overall, the phase one, the analysis and the design, is roughly around 3 to 6 months, depending upon the scope. From there, when you move from the analysis and design, you get into that development, that can be an additional 3 to 6 months that's required. And then after that, you get into your implementation and evaluation. And of course, it's not always just one thing right after another. But in these cases, the implementation and evaluations can be anywhere from 6 to 18 months. And the objective here is to internalize it to your workforce so that your workforce can continue on in a turnkey fashion for all of this. So let me take you through two other quick slides and try to talk you through our learning model at GP Strategies. Also, one of the key is you've got training capital, you got time and resources, and you got competencies that you want to get to your workforce. Over time, we all learn at varying speeds and paces our jobs. And it can start with initially just being equipment savvy, and 15 to 20% of that workforce is just equipment savvy. But then over time, you want to move to an experienced procedural and intuitive-based analysis so that you can get to the next stage where you see that 40 and 50% in yellow. That's a general qualitative setup. So now you have systematic analysis of things inside of your systems being very complex or very simple. Moving up to unit-specific qualitative, and then when you get to unit-specific quantitative. So the age-old qualitative versus quantitative, we're in business. We have a mission to generate capital for our companies in a positive way, do it as quickly as we can, as safely as we can, and maximize our economies of scale. So we want to get to the quantitative portion. The simple reality is, for most organizations, they don't enjoy that. So as I erase some of the things that you see there, what the real driver here is, our learning model can shrink the amount of time necessary to transfer both skills, knowledge, and abilities. Now, the operator competency that you see there, you should see a brown arrow near the top, and it's pointing to a vertical line, roughly around 70 to 80%. If you look at the distribution, that light blue curve basically equates to a normal situation that typically takes 20, 30, or even 30 plus years of learning. Based on our original curve, the original orange, what we've done is we've compressed. So you should see that yellow arrow now saying shift the competency curve. We're compressing that, and now what you're seeing is, instead of roughly 30 to 40 or 50 to, most of it is around the 70 to 80, and we can do it in a much shorter frame of time. So now, by implementing some of the learning models that we've employed, especially for the skilled trades workforce, those operators, we've reduced training days, we've accelerated the timeline so that those individuals can get out there and they are able to make the company money and perform the tasks that they need in a more rapid fashion. And in most cases, that is what a lot of us are tasked with trying to oversee and perform for our company, is coming up with a means that industry average on the operator competency is roughly around that 40 to 80%. And obviously with the curve, it shifts there. But if everything that we can do to reduce the amount of time it takes to get to that level of operator competency is money in the bank. And at the end of the day, the labor challenges that we're dealing with, a lot of the companies would be more than happy just to get anywhere in the 30 to 70 range, but in a short period of time. Part of the biggest challenges that we're facing today are that labor pool is almost evaporated. So much of the aging workforce is on its way out. Baby boomers are looking at a somewhat mass exodus of retirement, although with our continued economic woes, that is extending that from what the Bureau of Labor and Statistics had originally estimated. But the simple reality is we've got to get that industry average operator competency. We can't give up on that, so we can't give up our quality. But what we can do is we can compress the amount of time necessary to raise those individuals to that level. And how do you do that is, again, back to what I had mentioned a little bit earlier. It's going after blended learning solutions. And in this particular case, GP Strategies, especially if you're in the oil and gas industry, you're looking at lots of different ways in order to make the learning transfer and the knowledge management process done not just in a classroom. Classrooms are great. We definitely do a lot in the instructor-led, but they can also have things that are cognitive-based, and then you have a web-based or a VILT. and VILT means virtual instructor-led. So using smartboard and webcast technologies where a single instructor may be talking to 4 or 5 different facilities and classes simultaneously. We have audio, then you can get into role-based. We strongly recommend role-based training. A lot of times you see that in leadership or supervisory. Then you get into situational awareness, and it allows a person in a safe environment to run through scenarios so that they have the chance to have experienced it, again, not when they're in the middle of an emergency, but ahead of time, so that when they do hit that emergency, they can call upon those skills. Mobile technology, a lot of people like to talk about, is it mobile friendly? Can it be done? It absolutely can. It's just very important to understand exactly where your company is at, where your company's infrastructure is at, and making sure that you truly understand some of the technology and its limitations, because it is a very diverse setup, and especially in today's marketplace, a lot of organizations are doing what's called BYOD, or bring your own device. So that even adds to the complexity of mobile learning, but that doesn't mean that it isn't out there and it isn't possible. It certainly is. You can do videos. We're working with a lot of companies right now where we will go and shoot a video, and then it's a lot like your YouTube experience. By putting it on the learning management system, an operator or a field technician can actually access a company's YouTube site, so therefore it is proprietary. It can be firewalled, but then they can have their quote-unquote video coach walk through, here's how you isolate this valve. Here's how you're going to shut down this particular portion of the system. Or if you're working with a PLC of some sort or some type of instrumentation control situation, you can access that and get that video dialogue going, walking that person through that. Obviously, coaching and mentoring, structured OJT, simulations I've touched on. Then they get into, if I drop to the bottom here, things like, you see the term LCD, and that's not a liquid crystal diode. This is a large control diagram. Especially in this particular industry, or those that work in the oil and gas or a heavy process, petrochemical, what have you, having a large control diagram showing what I tease and call the gazins and gazouts of a process, and using very tried and true reading technologies like everything has to go from left to right, as long as you're dealing with an English-based audience. Make sure that the flow chart is designed to go that way. Make sure that there are changes in colors that are standardized. The thickness of the lines become an important part. Well, GP Strategies does a lot of these large control diagrams, and they very rapidly reduce the amount of learning time. The other key here is it can minimize your classroom time, because the large control diagrams can be placed wherever they need be, including a control room if necessary, or they can even be out in the field, or, as I mentioned before, it may be reposed as an electronic document that someone can bring up on a mobile device then. Think of your process description manuals. And again, with today's technology, we typically hear of a description manual and we think paper-based, which it still has its place. But it's a great opportunity for all of the various processes to be described and set up. And what I didn't list there, but one of the things that I am a very big fan of is troubleshooting exercises, where I absolutely believe that troubleshooting exercises should be something that people are given an opportunity to participate in and practice, because it is becoming a lost art. All right. I recognize I'm going a little bit further on time than I probably had originally intended, so let me try to bring this to a close and deal with any questions and answers that any of the attendees have. What you see on screen here is the BIC article from this summer, The Crisis, the Talent Gap in Our Labor Force, and an opportunity just to do a quick summary of the discussion that we've had here today. But it does talk about closing the skills gap especially when there's complex tasks that we're dealing with. And this is something that we have literally years of experiences, and we can definitely get in there and assist your organization in closing that gap. So what I'd like to do is I want to move on to the last or the closing slide. I welcome you to join our website, visit the website for the oil and gas strategies, or if you're focused more on the maintenance training, both of those are off of the GP strategy setup. And let me take a chance real quickly here. I'm going to check the Q&A and ask, is there anyone out there that has any questions that they'd like to put forth at this time? Okay, still looking for any questions. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds.
Eric, this is Mark from BIC Alliance. I just want to remind the audience while we're waiting for some questions to come in here that this presentation will be posted as an on-demand presentation. That is, you can click on it and watch it anytime. So you can go to bicalliance.com/webinars and click on that so you can share that link with your colleagues who can benefit from today's presentation. And it looks like there are a few questions here. One.
Yep. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just can you share the slides was what someone asked. And yes, we can. Email Eric there, the erogers@gpstrategies.com, and he can supply that to you.
And we also have another question that's asking about what are end user companies doing to support the high school vocational classes. That's actually an absolutely terrific question. And it's unfortunately, it's a very broad range of answers. What we have seen is several companies that we work with and for actually do everything from high school recruitment, where they'll do internship programs, working with the guidance counselors and the school board to ensure that the high school students are provided an opportunity to have an in-plant or in-site experience. Obviously, not all those positions are possible due to safety concerns, but there are ways that the companies have worked with the high school to work past that. What they have also done is they have donated time and energy with their subject matter experts in actually creating some of the vocational courses as far as key or critical outlines, everything from electrical fundamentals, electronics, introduction, basic mechanical theory, and like I mentioned in the earlier one, a skill as simple as print reading is absolutely critical, and yet you would think most people would not have trouble with that, and yet they do. So at this point, we definitely see a lot of theirs that are also, they are leveraging both state and local funds. I'm actually going to jump out of industry and go to automotive example. We have supported several automotive facilities in the startup of new plants, and there is a tremendous amount of state funds that are generally available to support a lot of that learning transfer. That doesn't necessarily always go to the high school, but a lot of it can go to the local community college, which that is that other stage in between both the high school and the local community college. Let's see, I'm checking for any more. I have another one asking, working with school districts to understand HB5 and what they have to do with counselors and educators. There's no state funding for this, and unfortunately that is exactly what some of our situation has been. Yes, there are others working out there with the high school districts. They aren't necessarily getting state funding for that. That actually has to come through the coffers of the company. Now that is in Eric's opinion, and that's in Eric's experience. That is not a qualified answer. There may be other programs that I'm currently not familiar with in certain states, because I certainly don't know all the different states' requirements, but I have seen a number of these programs will actually require the sponsoring corporation or organization to fund it. And we're getting a few more. We have, are you aware of a clearinghouse for sharing best practices that various industries and industrial companies are implementing locally with high schools and junior colleges? Yes and no. In this particular, especially when we use the word clearinghouse, it actually becomes economically a distractor or a detractor for organizations to do that, because let's just use Company A. If Company A is investing in that, they want the lion's share of that student population to come to them as a return on that investment. So a lot of times we don't see the clearing houses that you might hope for unless it is funded by a government, state, local type of entity that does not have direct economic ties to it. So it's a great question, again, talking about implementing them with both the community colleges or the high schools. But actually, in this case, the sharing of those best practices, the key word there is sharing it does not equate to industry advantage. So there's actually risk. And a lot of organizations we've seen tend to shy away from that because they're not going to invest their corporate dollars in a program that gets shared when the individuals may not necessarily come back to them as an investor. So very good question, Jeremy. I want to thank you for that, but unfortunately I had to give you a little bit less than positive response on that one. Okay? Looking for any additional? Mark, at this point I have not seen any additional questions come up in the past minute or so, so I think we may be at that point that we want to stop.
Excellent. Okay. I would ask our audience, if they do come up with questions, just to email Eric directly, and he can do his best to inform you further on the topic. And again, I want to remind our audience that the presentation will be available on an on-demand recorded basis beginning tomorrow. It's not available immediately. And you can find that at bicalliance.com/webinars, bicalliance.com/webinars. And I want to take this opportunity to really thank Eric Rogers and GP Strategies for sponsoring and presenting this information on this critical topic facing today's industry. Thank you again for attending, and have a great day.